in the case of Sam, he doesn't actually have delusions of grandeur, other than to be a bigger, better gardener, I guess, or maybe not bigger, but better. And it's interesting that he's given the seeds of the malhorn tree, and this is actually a real gift, but it's one that is appropriate to him. Whereas Frodo is given, remember from Galadriel, the phial which contains the light of Eärendil, the beloved star of the elves, which is because he's going on a dark quest. When all other lights fail, this will continue to work, and it does work, except that he's struck down by Shelob's sting, which doesn't kill him, but makes Sam think he's dead. And so then he takes the phial, and that actually equips him then to be the light bearer temporarily, as he's the ring bearer. And it doesn't seem to have a destructive effect on him, as far as Sam is not fatally wounded. He doesn't have to go to the Undying Lands at the end, right? He is obviously, as a ring bearer, the other ring bearers seem to have to go and not come back. Like Bilbo and Frodo, they're at the end, they're gone and they're not coming back. They've worn the ring. It's damaged them in a way that can't be healed there in Middle Earth. But Sam, for some reason, is not. And I find that sort of puzzling. Like, why is he not? Because he stays on. He's given the task of writing a book about it and continuing on the story, etc., even though he wore the ring. So I don't know if this is a lack of consistency on Tolkien's part, or what we would attribute it to. But he does wear the ring, so you would have thought that he would be damaged by it and not healed. And maybe it's just that he can carry on. He's not damaged enough. I don't know. But Frodo and Bilbo both have to go. It seems less to do with the ring than maybe with the blade. That's the Morgul blade that stuck in him, that has a wound that is so deep it will never be healed. Might be that in the case of Frodo. In the case of Bilbo, I'm not quite so sure. Anyway, it has this effect of depriving you of good, and he consistently portrays that the quest of the ring bearers to destroy the ring reaches towards Mount Doom and the land of shadow, the ring seems to get stronger, and its effect on the bearer seems to get more and more potent, such that Frodo, as we saw last time, fails to destroy the ring. And he is given wholly over to it. And so he says, the ring is mine. I will not do what I came to do. Right? So he renounces the good wholly, and it's important what he says there. He's effectively, as opposed to saying, thy will be done, he says, my will be done. It's mine. The ring is mine. Right? Whereas Jesus in Gethsemane says, not my will, but thy will be done. Right? He doesn't want to go to the cross, but he, in the end, is willing to let the Lord's will be done. Frodo is not able to say the same. So he renounces the will of God to assert his own will, and at that point he is given over to evil wholly, and it consumes him. Until, by the grace of God, he loses his finger entirely by a bite, and it's the finger that was already a little bit translucent because it had borne this ring of power, which was already having the effect of bringing him over into the shadow world. In fact, remember, that's the effect of it. It makes him invisible, and it also makes his life extend. So it's, in a sense, pulling him already into the realm of a shadowy sort of existence. And now it's just fully complete, but by the grace of God, he loses a finger. It's a funny old grace, you lose a finger. But it allows him to then walk away from it. And then Gollum, who is given over to the ring because of his oath, falls into Mount Doom, destroys the ring himself in the process, and completes the quest. And then the question is, who actually completes the quest? Is it Gollum that does a good act, or is it a power outside of Gollum that brings it to completion? I think it's pretty clear it's not Gollum's will. And it's not the ring's will either, and that's interesting. And the ring's connected with Sauron. Sauron clearly doesn't want the ring to be destroyed, so it's a will outside of their will. All of that very interesting. I raised the question last time, or mentioned, that one of the significant features of the company is the fact that Frodo is the ring bearer, because he doesn't seem a particularly virtuous character in a sense. He's not impressive. He doesn't have a long heritage like Aragorn. He's not the heir of Elendil. He's not Gandalf, who all look to for leadership. He seems rather incongruous, even amongst his own people. He is not well regarded. They're a little bit suspicious of him, probably because he's Bilbo's heir, and Bilbo is also a little suspicious because he left the Shire once and went on adventures and that sort of thing. Did odd things. Took interest in things that are unusual for hobbits, and it made him highly questionable for the hobbits. And Frodo likewise, and we'll see afterwards when he's finished the quest, he goes back and he gets no honor whatsoever. And that's also obviously intentional on Tolkien's part, talking about the prophet not having any honor in his own country, but also talking about the particular lot of somebody who will be like Christ. So he is a Christ figure in the sense that he's like the priest. He'll do the priestly act of atonement. He'll bear it himself. He'll bear his cross. Here the cross is the ring. Represents sin. It represents the power of sin. And so then the question is, why is it that the ring comes to the hobbits of all people? Because it first comes to Bilbo incongruously in the Hobbit, and then it comes to Frodo. Gandalf thinks that it's a comforting thought that it's come to him. Frodo isn't quite so sanguine about it. He's not so happy that the ring has come to him and that it's a comforting thought that he has the ring. He doesn't want the responsibility that comes with it. But it does come to him, and then the question is, if there's a sense of providence about the whole exercise, and conspicuous at the end when the ring, as it falls into Mount Doom in this sort of a little hokey ending, where you're dancing right on the edge of the place where the ring's going to be destroyed, and then you just fall into it. There's a sense of a little bit conspicuous God in the machine, Deus ex machina. Like there's a little bit of, okay, so now something pushed him into it, basically. And in fact, I think that's what Frodo said to him as well. If you do, the next time you say this, I will command you to throw yourself into it. Right? Remember, he says that the ring will hold you to this. And my next command will be exactly that, and you will do it. But the ring itself puts him in there. Okay, but the question is, why does it come to the Hobbit of all the creatures of Middle-earth? Not the elves, not the men, not the dwarves, obviously. Not one of the wise, the Istari. Why the hobbits? And it seems to be because there's no possibility of pride. Even the hobbits don't even take themselves seriously. It's a curious form of power to have, to be unthreatening to everybody else, to be a sort of a figure of mockery. You can literally overlook them. Oh, the halflings, the little people. But that seems to be characteristic of Frodo. And Frodo has a sort of a wisdom about him. Remember, he's 50 years old when he sets out. And yet, he doesn't think much of himself. He doesn't want to do great things, really. He would rather stay in the Shire and eat and drink and smoke pipe weed. He loves the Shire and everything it represents, and he doesn't want to go on a grand quest. And he doesn't think much. He doesn't even think he can be like Bilbo, but it comes to him. And so it's this humility and the humble nature of the Hobbit that seems to allow him to be resistant to the power of the ring. So it's what you don't expect. It's exactly the lack of apparent virtue, if virtue is strength, that gives him the virtue to resist the power. So it's not power with power, it's weakness. The power of weakness, if that makes any sense. And so what I think Tolkien is doing here, and several writers have mentioned this, commentators, is he is illustrating what Catholics and others in the Christian classical tradition will call the virtues. It's the virtues of the company that allow them to bear the ring and give them a certain sort of resistance to the evil. It's not sufficient to succeed in the quest. It's sufficient to resist the power of evil. And so I think we need to understand virtues not in a sense that allows us to be triumphant on our own, but as a sort of a hedge on the negative power of evil. It gives them that power, the power of virtue. And taking it back to the theme that I mentioned last semester for Lewis in The Abolition of Man, educating is training in wisdom and virtue. That's what education is. And his objection to the modern curriculum is that it no longer trains in wisdom and virtue. It presents facts and ideas and knowledge, but devoid of the character, the virtues that would be necessary to wield it wisely, and isn't even talking about doing it. It's just talking about power, the advance of science, sort of human progress. Remember, I talked about The Abolition of Man a little bit earlier on the course. Tolkien is in total agreement with that. By the way, if you read Mere Christianity, when he comes to the Christian life, he talks about the 7 virtues. And there are 4 cardinal virtues, and then there are 3 theological virtues. The 4 cardinal virtues are what? Wisdom, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. Sometimes categorized slightly differently, but these are the 4. And when they're called the cardinal virtues are the word cardus refers to a hinge or a road. Actually, it's a road. But it's a road common to the pagans and to the Christians. They're recognized, the virtues that were understood in the ancient world. Christians will also acknowledge these virtues, as genuine virtues. So they're part of, last time I talked about revelation, they're a part of general revelation. People recognize that these are the character of a good person. Always have been recognized in every culture. It's what Lewis calls the Tao, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Use Dante's depiction of this in his Divine Comedy to talk a little bit about that. But those 4 cardinal virtues are not sufficient from a Christian vantage point. There are 3 other virtues that the pagans did not know at all. And they're depicted by Dante in the form of faith, hope, and charity, or love. And the greatest of the 3 is love. Right? That's how it concludes 1 Corinthians 13. And gives them a color even. Green, white, and red. The colors of the Italian flag. Yeah, that's why they're those 3 colors. I'm not making a comment on Italians. The Italians are all cheering, but that's why the Italian flag is these three colors: green, white, and red. And red is love. And it's the one, go back to what we said about, well, last semester at any rate, about the four loves, is a different sort of love. It's divine love. It's agape love. And it transforms all the other loves. And not only does it do that, here's my claim, it transforms all the virtues. So it's not just that it transforms familial love or storge and friendship love or philia and erotic love, but it also changes what we call the virtues. They get changed by the character of God, who is love. Love divine changes the conception of the virtues. And Tolkien, I think, tries to exhibit that here, because there's something of the quest of the company here, which is not designed to succeed, but rather to hope for a success that they can't achieve. There's sort of a hope involved in the whole thing, and a faith and a commitment to it, without a sense that it's possible for them to succeed even. And that even comes down to the point where the ring comes to Frodo, and they even depict it this way. It comes to him, and it's not an accident. It's a power outside of themselves. So there's a sense throughout the whole narrative that the plot is being driven not by the characters in the plot, by something outside the plot. And the character of that driver of the plot is love. But again, because Tolkien is presenting it not as an allegory, but still as a sort of a picture of reality, it's just hinting at a successful quest, which is when Christ bears our sin on the cross and does finish it, right? And but doesn't have that in view here. But the virtues, how do the virtues get presented? So let me come to this first of all. This is from, there we go. This is from the Divine Comedy by Dante. This is Purgatorio, Book 1. And I taught Dante to some of you at any rate in first year, ever so briefly, and talked about purgatory. Again, it's part of Roman Catholic theology. I don't think Protestants hold to it at all. I don't think any Protestants do. I don't even think that the Anglicans do. But at any rate, Dante presents it as a part of general revelation, that there are certain vices and virtues that the pagans do acknowledge. And I think whether you're Catholic or Protestant, there is at least some sort of tradition that will acknowledge that there are certain products of general revelation that even the pagans do know, and they are genuine revelation, and that's what we will call what Romans 1 speaks of, right? So that's the product of general revelation, and they know this and they act in accordance with it because it's been made known to them, and therefore they're without excuse because they ought to have known even more than they acknowledge, but they did act in accordance with it. And the depiction of that is, at least in terms of the theology of the medieval period, is that this is the revelation that comes to reason through nature. It's natural revelation that will show us the virtuous life in accordance, and I've already talked about the four cardinal virtues. And the exemplification of that is right here at the foot of Mount Purgatory. There's a figure there. And these virtues would have been entirely known to Adam. So the narrative here, I think this is about around line 22 in Purgatorio, Book 1. This is Virgil looking. I turned to the right, setting my mind upon the other pole, and saw 4 stars not seen before except by the first people. But the first people, Adam and Eve. No one has seen this since, because the purpose of those virtues has been somewhat blunted. They're not seen directly now. They're seen indirectly in Revelation and so forth. But heaven appeared to revel in their flames, O northern hemisphere, because you were denied that sight. You are a widower. Remember, well, I don't even remember. I'm not here to teach you Dante, but he goes from the northern hemisphere into the southern hemisphere. I'll get you a picture here, just so you have a sense of the strange design of that book image. That's not what I want. Where is the picture? Well, this is all the Mount Purgatory. I want the whole flip. Map, diagram, illustration. No. Isn't that annoying? There you go. Oh. So here is the northern hemisphere, and Jerusalem there at the bottom of it. And he goes down through hell, down through there, and then up through the other side, which is in the southern hemisphere. I mean, it's just, again, I don't think it's meant to be literal. It's meant to be, it's illustrative. It's a sort of an image of these things. Mount Purgatory is on the opposite side of hell. Okay, so Jerusalem here was once flipped the other way around. Satan falls like lightning from heaven, hits the earth. When he hits the earth, he displaces all the ground here up to make a mountain on the other side, and the earth also flips so that hell is as far away from God as can be. It's on the other side of the planet even. Right? Milton seems to have that sort of depiction as well, that hell is as far away from God as can possibly be. Well, it's even on the other side of the world in Paradise Lost. So he hits here, the earth that he hits the ground with, Satan's here stuck at the bottom of it all, and the earth gets pushed up to the other side. Well, that becomes Mount Purgatory then, and is orientated towards the heavens, and they're going up there, Mount Purgatory, if that makes any sense. And there are certain 7 steps up that, and 7 deadly sins on that, and each sin is represented by a P on the forehead of the sinner. P for peccatum, or sin. And as you ascend the stages of Mount Purgatory, the P disappears from your forehead as the sin is purged from you, and you go up, 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 up. And you end up in the earthly paradise at the top, which is where you could see the 4 virtues from the beginning. That was a very quick and not very helpful illustration there. But this is what he has in mind, that originally the first people saw these, and we no longer see them. But so he's just trying to, and he sees a solitary patriarch near me, his aspect worthy of reverence, that even son to father owes no more. His beard was long and mixed with white, as were the hairs, there we go, upon his head, and his hair spread down his chest in a divided tress. The rays of the 4 holy stars so framed his face with light that in my sight he seemed like one who's confronted by the sun. Well, who is this? This is Cato, who's the most, a figure of virtue in the ancient world. Some think, and I'm inclined to agree with this, that Aeneas represents reason here, natural human reasoning, and he can lead us up all the way to understand the pagan view of the virtues. But he can't go any farther because he's not a Christian. After that, he'll have to hand it over to Beatrice, and she, who represents faith, will go the next step up, take him up to heaven. At any rate, so Tolkien is making a reference to this by giving his characters virtues and making them more heavenly. And by being more heavenly, they're more resistant to evil, which is down below. They're more up here. That doesn't mean they can get up further. They can't. They're not going to get to heaven. It'll be Jesus that takes them to heaven. Takes man and will wholly deal with it. But their virtues, to extent, make them resistant to the power of the Balrog in the realm of shadows, which is down here. I'm just trying to give you a picture in your mind's eye of a sense of what I think he's trying to do with this. And then he depicts that consistently in his Lord of the Rings through the way in which his characters act and what motivates them. And one of the things that motivates them and shows the company is devoted to this is their willingness to be committed to each other, a free oath, and which they can break at any time. They're not bound by it. It's a voluntary oath. And yet the purpose of it is not to, it's to negate their quest in a sense. They're just doing a foolish thing, a very foolish thing. It's so foolish that Sauron can never conceive of it, because Sauron would take the ring, because that's the thing that any power on earth would do. But that is not a virtuous thing. It's the exact opposite of a virtuous thing. It's the will to power. It's to be beyond good and evil. It's to put yourself above the rule of natural law. It's to want domination over the rest of the world. And all of Middle Earth would be under that authority, and you yourself would put yourself above it, which is exactly what is a sort of a satanic act, which is what lands him down here. And it's pride then that leads him here. And so the chief virtue of Frodo is that he is the best exhibition of humility. So let me talk about him. I'm going to talk about the virtues, the four cardinal virtues. Today I'm going to talk about just two of them. I'm going to talk about wisdom, and I'm going to talk about prudence, surprisingly. Wisdom is what leads the company. Gandalf is what leads the company up to a certain point. And you'll know that even in the depiction of how they're portrayed in the film. Gandalf is at the forefront of the 9 as they're walking. He's the one up front. So wisdom is leading them on. It's a pictorial representation. And at the rear, who's at the back of the pack? Nope. Aragorn. Funny old thing. He's the leader of, in some sense, he's the would-be leader. But he's at the back, which is, again, telling. Now, if you ever watch wolves, they do the same thing. The second strongest wolf goes at the front, and the strongest wolf is at the back. It's a funny old thing. I don't think there's any humility being displayed there, but there's something in that lineup of the one at the back being able to see what's going on and be able to watch over the ones in front of them, right, and make sure that nobody falls along the way, and he's able to jump in at any point and intervene. That just struck me afterwards. I'm not sure if it's got anything to do with Tolkien. I don't think it has anything to do with him whatsoever, but yes.
I was going to say that I think it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I always thought that, like, there's a few points at which Frodo, like, falls, or he gets trapped in, like, the snow up in the mountains or whatever, and he's, like, sliding down the hill, and every time Aragorn's there at the back.
He's sitting there waiting to pick up stragglers.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have kids, you want to do that as well. And you know, in kindergarten, you watch them; they all hold their hands in a line, right? And if you're a teacher, you put certain kids at the front and the back of the line. Everybody wants to be at the front of the line, right? But the kid that's most reliable, you put at the back of the line. The teacher tends to lead the way at the front, or if you've got two teachers, one's at the front, one's at the back, right? And one's sort of, this is where we're going, so you don't go over there. You know, something shiny and like, oh, let's go over there. No, we're following the teacher. But then there's the one at the back who's making sure that everybody goes, but they're all in a line then. And the kids are lined up that way as well. So there's some wisdom even in the ordering of the kids. But it is certainly the case in The Lord of the Rings that I think the strongest character is at the back. And there's a little bit of humility in that even. And that is one of the things that allows Tolkien's Aragorn to be the great man that he is that he will not seize greatness. He is the heir of Elendil. He has how many titles? It sort of starts to become a little bit faintly ridiculous, but also that he has the sword, which has been reforged to do? Well, it's the sword that cut off the ring to begin with. And yet he will not ride to the White City. He won't go anywhere near it, and he will not touch the ring. Even though, again, it's part of his inheritance, if you will. Because it came to Elendil, who was so foolish as to say, I'm not going to destroy the ring. I'm going to keep it as a sort of an heirloom for men. And he just has it around his ring, around his neck, in a necklace and so forth. And he gets betrayed by the ring, so it says. Again, a sort of an odd thing, because the ring has no agency. It's not a sentient being, and yet it's connected with Sauron. So it's a suggestion in a sense that it's a satanic agency. To give agency is to give it a being, and he doesn't want to suggest that too strongly, but on the other hand, he wants to suggest that it has some sort of a power and a will of its own, which is connected to the will of his master, which is, again, Sauron. Anyway, how did I get there? So the chief conviction of Tolkien is that the light conquers the darkness. The darkness does not define the light, it's the other way around. Very important from Christian theology, the vantage point of Christian theology, is not to focus too much on evil. Very important. The existence of hell and of the devil are part of Orthodox Christianity, but they're not mentioned in the creeds. Existence of hell, yes, but of Satan, not so. It's not because they don't acknowledge they exist, but again, you don't want to give too much credit to the devil. You don't talk about, by naming things and focusing on them, you give more attention and reality to something than you ought to. So it's not to deny, Satan doesn't exist, none of that. I mean, Jesus talks about Satan a fair bit, and hell. And yet, in terms of the creeds, this is what we believe. It's not that we then talk about all the things that, in a sense, we believe that exists, but we don't want to make it a matter of orthodoxy in the same sense, if you know what I mean. So it's the light that we're going to talk about, and the light will illuminate the darkness. That's the positive thing about the Lord of the Rings, and I think this is the most powerful aspect of the whole of the Lord of the Rings, is not how powerfully evil is portrayed, but how powerfully good is portrayed. That's what makes it distinctive. Both, the two things. Who would not like to meet any one of those 9 characters? Because they're so good. And their goodness is not in their strength in the classical sense. It's in the Christian, gracious baptism of the virtues, if you will. And they show by their resistance to evil that, to a small degree, the life of wisdom and virtue can partly resist the onslaught of evil, which I think is what every educator has always thought. And Christian educators particularly think this is why you train in wisdom and virtue, is so that people are resistant to evil. It's not that they can't fall, but they are less likely to. If you were there for the lecture on Friday, they can exert themselves. Remember? You were there for it, a few of you? The lecture. You can exert yourself to something other than yourself, a higher thing. You're going to resist the temptation to despair. You're going to resist the temptation to pride. You're going to resist the temptation to gluttony or excess. So that portrait of the virtuous life is a shadow, if you will, of the true virtuous life which Jesus lives. And the word shadow on my part is there intentionally. There's a privation of even our virtuous lives as a real portrait of the good. So even the best of people are pale shadows, which is why we said we need to be clothed in Christ. We have our life in Christ. We have our faith in Christ. We're saved by the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, etc., etc. So it's the bright vision of hope and the moral and religious strength of the company, even though there's no reference to religion, that actually I think gives it its power. How many lectures do I have on the Lord of the Rings? I don't know, about 9, 10 something. I want to devote time to this because I think it's a central feature. I can talk about all sorts of stuff, but I want to hit the high points. And I think it's this that makes it compelling, like nothing else. And this is what makes Tolkien the author of the century, is he has good characters. While I'm teaching this, I'm teaching George Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World, all of which are people find profound, but and they are profound in a sense that they portray the 20th century and all of its depravity, but what they don't portray in any sense is a sense of hope and goodness. It's just not there. It's bleak, it's desperate, it's despairing. So, there's a triumph of light over darkness, but there is also a sense that virtues are a part of that light. Just like the light on the face of Cato, the 4 stars that reference the 4 cardinal virtues, a face with light that in my sight he seemed like one who's confronted by the sun. Who are you, says Cato, who against the hidden river were able to escape the eternal prison, he said, moving those venerable plumes. Who was your guide? What served you both as lantern when from the deep night that will always keep the hellish valley dark you were set free? The laws of the abyss, have they been broken? Or as a changed decree in heaven let you, though damned, approach my rocky slopes? My guide took hold of me decisively by way of words and hands and other signs. He made my knees and brow show reverence. Then he replied, that is Virgil, I do not come through my own self. There was a lady sent from heaven. Her pleas led me to help and guide this man. So, and that was Beatrice, who had been sent by the Blessed Virgin and so forth. There were 3 ladies that sent him. But at any rate, so Virgil, reason has been leading him to this point, and he will lead him all the way up to the top of Mount Purgatory, and then he will go no further. He'll vanish because he can't take him any further. But we're going to get something like this in The Lord of the Rings, I think. A theologically infused grace that will take us to the point where you can see the good and the beautiful and the true, but you're not going to get there because only Jesus is going to take you the rest of the way. So it's a rational depiction of virtue tempered by grace or love or charity. And Tolkien holds, just as Lewis did, to the Augustinian view that revelation, Christian revelation, perfects human knowledge and effort. Aquinas, exactly the same. And of course, Dante synthesizes Thomas's thought in poetic form. But it's these virtues that allow human existence to flourish, and a culture without these virtues will lack any resistance to evil. So if you have a culture with no justice, with no prudence, with no fortitude, with no temperance, it will be a dark culture indeed. you'll live in a culture where men are without chests. And you want men to stand up and be men, and there are no men to be found. So the important part, and I think I've already given it away, of the way Tolkien tells the story is, even though he talks about these 9 characters who seems to possess these virtues, is that the virtues are to some degree given to them. They're gifts. That was the emphasis of Leaf by Niggle as well. It's a gift. Remember, he can draw a leaf, but he doesn't see the full tree. There's a grander vision that drives the company on. That sort of lies outside the scope of the Lord of the Rings, and yet it's the what drives the plot along. The valor, if you will. So as Augustine says in his Confessions, Lord, you've made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in thee. Right? So there's a love that drives the narrative that's not explicitly mentioned, but is referred to in the sense of the stars. The stars are there and seem to have a sort of a sense of that illumination in the novel, and even in reference to Arundel, the beloved star of the elves. It's not just light, it's love. There's more to the light than simply light. And so these are gifts of God, these virtues, and they are the product of God's gracious involvement in the life of the now, to use Lewis's phrase. And here we have in the now, because we don't have just men, we have elves and dwarves and hobbits, all of whom have reason and all who understand virtue. And the hobbits in particular have the virtue of humility, which is a great virtue, forbearing or resisting the power of evil, which tends towards self-aggrandizement. So if you think of the monstrous figures of the 20th century, now the 21st, they tend to be great men. The Hitlers, the Stalins, whoever, I'm not going to name names in the 21st century, I don't want to be political. I have my own views about who these bad men are. They're probably the same as some of you would think. But the Alexander the Great, the Napoleon Bonapartes, you name them. They're by the world standards, these are great men. And they are great insofar as they have certain virtues even. They could not be great without the virtues. But they're wicked insofar as they don't recognize that they need to be tempered by grace. So this is the problem, and this is what Lewis talks about when he talked about the 4 loves, is that the 3 forms of love that he identifies, if they're not tempered by the 4th, that is the agape love of God, they become distorted and they become insidious and evil. So the love for your lover becomes marked by jealousy, possessiveness. The love for your child becomes, again, possessive, and the child who you loved and were willing to give up your life for becomes somebody that you want to control, won't let go, etc. So it becomes perverted when it's just held unto itself, as if the finite, smaller forms of love were the ultimate form. Same with the virtues. So these are not autonomous. They don't stand on their own. They're not human achievements. They're sort of like signposts of grace that have been given to us in nature. So this is really important, because there is a way of depicting the virtues from a pseudo-Protestant position that suggests that to speak of virtues is to deny grace. And that's misunderstanding the whole situation here. Grace is the perfection of those virtues. It is not the replacement of those virtues. It's a sort of a contour of what a gracious life will look like, to have those virtues in a certain form. Or it's the form, if you will. That's what the virtues are. They're the form. Forms of grace. So Augustine in On Christian Doctrine says, Book 4, Section 33, whence it happens that even with the assistance of holy men, or even if the holy angels themselves take part, no one rightly learns those things which pertain to life with God unless he is made by God docile to God, to whom it is said in the psalm, "Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God." So in other words, grace is what makes us teachable. To follow God is to be teachable, to be docile, to be meek. The meek shall inherit the earth. To be meek is to be humble, to accept in the midst of darkness that there is no other path but the path of obedience. Lewis illustrated that in his sci-fi trilogy in the character of Elwyn Ransom, who in the end didn't do anything. Like when you come to that hideous strength, what is he doing? He's not even the main protagonist anymore. He's wrestling in prayer, which seems to be doing absolutely nothing. But it seems like he's at his most potent at the point where, remember, and he's wounded. There's a wound in his heel that will not stop bleeding. He's like Frodo. So he's been prepared for his vocation through suffering and through resisting evil to become in his most effective form, to be a prayer warrior. So when grace comes to the virtues, it enables them or empowers them to be what they actually are and most fully are in the form of Christ himself. So I think that this is necessary for seeing how Tolkien perceives it. And this is, again, why when there are certain critics that want to read Tolkien as saying, yes, we know Tolkien's a Catholic, but there's no mention of Christian virtues in The Lord of the Rings. There's no mention of God, there's no prayer, there's no religion, none of that, so we can read it just in a pagan way. The problem with that view is that no pagan understands the virtues the way the characters in The Lord of the Rings do. There's a Christian understanding of what the virtuous life looks like. Because nobody in the ancient world regards humility as a virtue. None. Not one. For Aristotle, it would be the antithesis of what a virtuous man would do, would be to be humble. So it's Christ that is behind the way in which the virtues are being presented in The Lord of the Rings, if that makes any sense. So how about this? So first, then we'll look at prudence. It seems a funny place to begin, but prudence is the virtue of all the virtues. It directs all the rest and puts them into action. And by putting them into action, what is the action that is needed? In the case of The Lord of the Rings, it's to destroy the ring. And to know when to act at the right time. This is what is exhibited by the most prudent characters in The Lord of the Rings. And who are they? Well, the one at the front and the one at the back of the line. Gandalf at the front, who represents wisdom, and Aragorn, who is very prudent. He's been biding his time. He's a ranger of the north. He's gone nowhere near Gondor, although he is the heir of Elendil. He's been waiting. All that glitters is not gold, right? And Gandalf says that this line, this poetry, is a reference explicitly to him. And so he is sort of incongruous. He's a bit of a dark horse. Nobody expects Aragorn to actually be Elisar, right? This is the heir of Elendil. What? Strider? He's just a guy with long legs, big strides, that's it, right? And he lived a long time and so forth, but he doesn't seem to have much more to this. So there are the two figures, I think, at the front and at the back of the line, who represents the virtue of prudence, particularly in The Lord of the Rings. So let's look at Gandalf first of all. Gandalf clearly represents wisdom. He's one of the Istari, one of the five figures that are the equivalent of wizards in the Lord of the Rings. The word Istari means scholars, interestingly. And we saw that one of the ways in which Gandalf shows his wisdom is by doing archival research. You know, he goes away for a few decades. When he finally gets the ring, Bilbo's left the ring to Frodo. And, if you watch the movie, the time lag is not apparent, but he goes away a long time. Disappears, I think, like 17 years, I think it is, to figure out what this ring is. And he's not willing to guess. He knows it's a powerful ring, but is it the ring, the one ring? He doesn't know that. He goes and does careful scholarship to make sure that he's right about this. And he's not right in the sense he didn't know. It surprises him, because how on earth would Bilbo have got this ring? And then Frodo have got this ring? Because after all, Elendil had the ring, and it went down into the river, and it was lost. How did it get where it is? So Gandalf's wisdom is connected with his deep learning. And the hobbits, interestingly, seem to have some of that wisdom. At least Samwise does. It's interesting, his name is Samwise, because he loves elven things. He loves the wisdom of the poetry. He absolutely loves it. And the elves marvel at him. And Frodo and Bilbo likewise write wise poetry. So there's some, and the other hobbits regard this as a total waste of time. Why are you doing the sort of thing that interests the elves? That's not very hobbit-like. And why are you bothering with the stuff that the big people are interested in? This is not hobbity of you. So it's a sort of wisdom, and part of it means being receptive to being taught. This is the product of wisdom, and for which Socrates is renowned. Right? Socrates says that all he knows is that he knows nothing. So he goes around to everyone and saying, tell me, I hear you're reputed for wisdom, teach me, and so forth. And you know what's going to happen at the end. He's going to show that the teacher is not half so wise as he is, and then the guy's going to want to punch Socrates in the nose. And it's kind of funny. But it does show it shows humility as the path of wisdom. Now, Augustine in De Doctrina says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which is true. But then after that, humility, which is the willingness to be taught and not say that you know more than you do know. And one of the most humbling things about growing old as a scholar is to become aware of how little you know. Not be a know-it-all. Very difficult, because the more you are aware of that, the more people ask you to speak in public. And the more you feel like an idiot. Why am I doing the thing that I least should do? Anyway, but you're receptive to instruction if you are wise. And who is going to instruct you? God. You are going to heed the counsel of others. Some of the smartest people I know will take no counsel because they're so smart that they think they're the smartest people in the room. And so they reject others' counsel and thereby make themselves proud fools. And they possessed an honesty and as I say, a self-abasement that is important for wisdom. Remember that Solomon was renowned for his wisdom, is also associated with suffering, and Odysseus is as well. Again, we had a lecture on Friday that talked a bit about the scar of Odysseus as being a mark of a sort of a path of wisdom. Odysseus, who's the favored of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Something about suffering and wisdom that go together. and that means that to some degree a lack of sense of your own strength being able to take you where you want to go. You need divine help. So there's a restraint, and that means that restraint is mostly connected with prudence, and prudence is acting at the right time in the right way. So prudence is not parsimonious, being, parsimonious, use words that more. Being prudent is, people associate prudence with being, tight with their budget. Not spending too much. But prudence, the way Tolkien understands it, is knowing when to act and how to act. And Aragorn still illustrates this like no other character. And you will see Aragorn deliberating and agonizing over what choice, like particularly when Gandalf falls into the shadow. And now it's Aragorn that has to step up. And Aragorn doesn't know what to do. He's quite candid about it, which is not exactly encouraging when you're in a position of leadership and everybody's like, what do we do now? And it's like, well, I don't really know. But note that Gandalf did this as well when he went into the mines of Moria. He didn't know where to go. He's in the dark. He's not sure. He's not going to keep walking just because he's in the lead. Let's stop here and I'll smoke my pipe for a bit and think about it. Same thing with Aragorn. There's a sense of humility that's just confessing a lack of wisdom about which way to go forward and waiting. And even when he finally realizes what needs to be done, and it's clear in the Council of Elrond, they're there to destroy the ring, which none of them want to do. At least none of the strong want to do. Boromir does not want to destroy the ring. He wants to use the ring. But they say, we will destroy the ring. And they say, okay, that we're agreed, we'll do that. And then they set out to do it. But that doesn't mean it tells them how exactly are we going to do that. Well, you have to go to Mount Doom. Okay, but how do we get there? And when I say how, they know where it is. But do you go straight there? Do you go by Gondor? Because Gondor will be more protection. If you go through the path they end up going, this is a very dangerous place. There's nothing good there. It is not hospitable. You're going through a swamp. You're going through ashen lands. There is no cover. There's no greenery. There's nothing to sustain your life. Do you really want to go that way? And that's the way they choose to go in the end. Or rather, Frodo chooses to go. And Gandalf or Aragorn decides to let Frodo go. And this is his prudence at that point. Because the Fellowship originally said, we're all going to go there together. Frodo, who's the ring bearer, in the end says, I can't trust any of you. You're all going to turn on me. This is my task to bear this, and I'm going to have to go it alone. And Aragorn, in his prudence, lets him go, even though he'd sworn to take him there. He gives over to the leadership of Frodo in bearing the ring. Does not seem a wise thing to him to do at all. And we'll find the exact same thing, by the way, in another figure of wisdom, which is the figure of Faramir. When he catches him, it would seem a very foolish thing to go where Frodo wants to go. I'm going to go directly there. He says, don't go there, Frodo. There's a menace in those cliffs that I fear greatly. But in the end, he lets him go. Faramir is another wise figure and a prudent figure. And this is what I don't like in the movie, is Faramir is portrayed as a sniveling older brother. He's sort of weak and cries a lot. And that's not how he's portrayed in the book at all. He's a wise figure. Denethor doesn't like him, not because I don't even know why. Because the younger brother's stronger or something like that. It's not. It's because the younger brother is a fool. Boromir. He trusts in his own strength. Faramir is wise like Aragorn, and would be willing to give up the power of the ring. So there's prudence displayed in Faramir's actions as well as Gandalf's actions, as well as Aragorn's actions. All of these are prudent, wise characters. And likewise in Galadriel, when she has the power of the ring, when it's offered to her, she gives it up. She has to pass the test. But it is a test, and it's a test of prudence. So it's making the right decision at the right time. And that's one of the things when Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White. Even then, what do we do now? What would be the right course of action? You see deliberation amongst them. And they decide to do the most foolish thing. We're going to go out and fight him head on, which means that he's going to destroy us. But we're going to do that because the quest doesn't depend on us. It depends on Frodo, and we're going to trust to Frodo that he's behind the lines, and we're drawing the eye of Sauron away from him towards us. And so that this is the wise counsel, is to bring that on them at this point. So he has this, the reason that Aragorn is a fit ruler of Gondor is because he doesn't go to Gondor, and because he does not put himself forward as the general or the leader or the king of the White City while the ring is still active. He refuses to do that. He won't. So even when he comes to the defense of the city, he comes on the ships of the Haradrim, and he doesn't go into the city at all. He won't go into the city. So he's helping the whole company deal with the choices of good and evil and how to wield it in what way at what time. And say it's his right to go into the city and say, the king's here. You're the steward, hand over the keys. But that's not his path, because he, as the king, is not going to be able to deal with the problem of the ring. He needs to be incognito, as it were. He's happy to operate. He's happy to operate as Strider. And one of the things that he then does in his prudence is go down the paths of the dead, which is a heroic task. It's one akin to Odysseus and Aeneas. And he's going to bring those oath breakers into swearing a new oath to undo the evil that they've done and let their spirits rest. And so all sorts of stuff being illustrated here by Tolkien, I think. So all sorts of illustrations there. And one of the things that Tolkien's Aragorn then does is he talks to what his heart urges him to do. Not his head, his heart. And when he speaks to his heart, I think he's speaking of the baptized version of his virtues, but even more than that, I think he's appealing to grace. What is God leading me to do here? He never says that. But he talks about his heart. What's leading him at this point? It seems to be something outside of himself. So he says, remember when Frodo goes across the river and Sam goes with him, almost drowns himself in the process, and he goes to the other side, and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli see them there, and they could catch them, we can go after them, but they decide not to go. We're not going to go there. And here's what he says. Let me think, said Aragorn, and now may I make a right choice and change the evil fate of this unhappy day. He stood silent for a moment. I will follow the orcs, he said at last. I would have guided Frodo to Mordor and gone with him to the end. But if I seek him now in the wilderness, I must abandon the captives to torment and death. My heart speaks clearly at last. The fate of the bearer is in my hands no longer. The company has played its part. Yet we that remain cannot forsake our companions while we have strength left. Come, we will go now. Leave all that can be spared behind. We will press on by day and dark. His prudence here is almost a synonym for his conscience. He's not going to leave the weakest behind. Like, he's at the back of the company. 2 have gone astray. They've gone off the path. The other is actually the ring bearer. He's decided he's going to go. Aragorn could still follow him behind and pick off the bad guys, like show up at the right time. I'm not going to let him see me. I'll just hide, and then when somebody comes in, I'll swoop forward and save his bacon. No, he decides to go after the other 2 who are part of the company, and he does it out of a prudent sense of what the right thing to do is. Now, it doesn't, again, he's not following the path that was laid down for him at the Council of Elrond. He's choosing a different path, and he's being led there by what is the right thing to do right now. He's following his heart, his chest, his loves, his commitment to his friends, the weak that are about to die. And so he can discern, because his virtues have been formed by love, he can choose the right thing. And he chooses to go after the hobbits, and as the other 2, and as a result, he goes through a very circuitous path that ends up bringing Gondor into the fray after all, and actually, first of all, goes to the King of the Golden Hall, and brings men along for the fight. And eventually that force will distract Sauron from looking at his own land. Now, that's not the intention from the beginning, but that's by making a small little choice to look after the 2 little hobbits, and a different course is opened up. That was not his, he didn't have a grand plan. All right, hold on. Here's what we're going to do. I'll let those 2 go here, and I'm going to misdirect Sauron. That's not how it plays out. It's little small acts of conscience that lead him to a path where God's will can be done in orchestration of his will. And so he acts in accordance with, again, I say, he is a man with a chest. He has such a chest. But it exhibits itself in his love for his friends. And that's one of the things that is delightful, even in the film version, is the love born between Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. Such that, again, Gimli, who hates the elves, and vice versa, asks for his gift to be 2 hairs from Galadriel's head, which is what a courtly lover wants, right? I'll treasure your hairs together, I'll keep them in the locket around my chest, whatever. He asks like this as if he were a courtly lover, and she gives him 5. And the elves are so moved by the courtliness of Gimli and his virtue in asking for such a small thing, rather than power, or because she asks him, what gift do you want? Like, he's given knives and all sorts of fancy things. Just give me a couple strands of your hair. And this is, they are so moved by this. And there's a love that is kindled between the elves and the dwarfs that undoes the historic hostility between the 2 races that goes back to the Silmarillion days. And so then Legolas and Gimli become fast friends, and the 2 races are reconciled through this. So this is a consequence, again, sort of goes outside of the Lord of the Rings as if it's a small thing, but it is no small thing for racial hostility to be healed like this. It just doesn't get played out in the novel, or the novel in the story. But there's a hint that they will go to the grand golden caves of the dwarves, and Legolas will marvel at the light there. So the genuine love and affection forged in those situations. Anyway, I've run out of time already. Any comments or questions about this? I've only got to prudence and wisdom. Oh well. But you can see that wisdom is central to this, but wisdom's not enough. Prudence is knowing how to act on the wisdom in that moment. Wisdom only leads you to the general counsel. It's there, but how to act at that moment, that is when wisdom works with the virtue which has been baptized by love to act in the right way. Always do the right thing, even if it seems a small thing. It may take you down a path that will take you away from what seems like your main goal, but may end up leading you back where you want to be. That's how it's portrayed here. I think it's brilliant. Anyway, okay, good for now. No questions.